Welcome in, everyone, and thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. It's Friday afternoon. I know you're getting geared up for the Fayetteville Regional. The Dogs, I think, here in about 35 minutes or so, 40 minutes, are going to, first pitch against North Dakota State. So I know you're going to be wanting to focus on that. But we've got some important intel today. This is a good intel day when we talk Arkansas Razorbacks men's basketball and what could be on the horizon. Maybe, maybe not. For the current roster, which we keep going back and forth on, is we know there's room to add one more. It probably makes sense to add at least one more. And today the information I've gotten continues to suggest that just maybe Arkansas is being a little stealth about this. It doesn't mean that they will add somebody. It just looks to me like they're still highly considering it, and at least one player who we've talked a lot about still pursuing, and it looks like it's on a trajectory to potentially be somebody that Arkansas would add. I can't come on here with intel today and say, oh, I know for a fact Arkansas is going to add another player, and here it is. That's not how intel works. Things build up and escalate. It's not like parties snap their fingers and go, okay, let's do this. It takes time. Recruiting takes time. Even in the portal, which seems to be kind of shut down for now for Arkansas, maybe for good. We'll see. But I will say this. The idea that Arkansas is happy with the 10 that they have, with 8 of those players being your top 2 rotation with the heavy minutes we talk about all the time, 2 more being playable depth, but how playable? Do you have a rotation workup for them, or is it just based on emergency? We've gone through the names. We know there's additional players on that back end, kind of those, glorified walk-on types that are important for bodies in practice and the locker room and all of those things. It's part of your roster, part of your winning culture. Gets you to 12. But let's go back to, let's just say, top rotation players for now. Let's just keep it at the 8. We don't have to go back through all the names right now, but the point is, I think Arkansas is still very much in the mix to add a 9th player to that. So let's drill it down to that and leave the other stuff just outside of that. Good afternoon, Kevin Wu Pixu. Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. So this is where we're at with this. We've been talking a lot about this player for months since he visited Arkansas back in September. Miikka Muurinen, 6'10", 6'11-ish, somewhere in that range. I've seen him play multiple times in person. With Brad Bill Elite, was really teaming up with J.J. Andrews, the 5-star class of 2026. They're both in the same class right now on that Brad Bill Elite Nike E16 championship, and Miikka Muurinen was the MVP. And then he visits, that was back in July. Then he takes that official visit to Arkansas in late September after having already visited Michigan. Prior to that, Utah. We talked about all this. I had a source that spoke directly with him. I'm going to review everything to get us on the same plane of where we're at now. But that his Arkansas visit, that source said directly speaking with him, blew away the Michigan and Utah visits. He then canceled a visit to Duke. Again, this is back in the fall. Things change. Other teams come into the picture. Coaching changes, all kinds of stuff. He was flirting with Kentucky over a visit. I don't think it's ever happened. And here we are, where the reclass stuff we were talking about then was maybe likely, something he was seriously considering for certain, if not likely, but something that was a strong consideration. So over time, after that spectacular performance on the circuit, goes to Arizona Compass Prep for his what was last season, his junior season. And, there was some mediocrity in there in terms of what you would expect from him and the performances he had on the circuit versus kind of what was going on there. And then it started tamping down on the reclass talk. That stuff over the last several weeks, since we got into portal season, started ramping up back up. And we brought you intel every single time, good back behind the scenes intel about it's ramping up. The people I talk to think of all the reclass candidates of 26, he's the most likely. Yesterday, I brought you new intel again saying that now, talking with the same people, it seems almost inevitable. Like he's likely to reclass. It seems like it's on a course that's going to happen. I told you talking with this Arkansas coaching staff, I brought up, are you still recruiting Miikka Muurinen? Yes. Even as a reclass candidate, affirmative. So all of these things are already in place, stuff we've already talked about through yesterday's episode. So we've kind of handled some of this stuff already. It kind of builds kind of over time, and and then up to recent time, it kind of builds you a picture of where Muurinen is likely thinking, what his thinking is, what his camp's thinking is. We mentioned that he's actually already 18, and I said it yesterday. So a reclass and coming to Arkansas would, or anywhere on the high major level wouldn't be crazy age wise. Like a really younger guy trying to enter Division I basketball after skipping a final season of high school. No, he's already 18. It's not age wise, not crazy. So there's a few things here that I have gathered, a couple of things since then. I think they're significant. One is, and this is a gentleman that I have communicated with before on players, but he's really dialed in on international players. Armand Jovic of PDT Scouting. We've had like I said, talks about different players at different times. But he told me, and this is what's interesting. So I'm going to, kind of go through this a little bit, but he just told me that it's been the plan for a while now for Muurinen to reclass. So it lines up with what I talked about yesterday. This is a conversation I had with him since we were on yesterday with Armand Jovic. So it's been the plan for a while. So we know it's been talked about for a long time. I just went over the timeline, right? It's been talked about for a long time, but the plan, it's the plan. And we were saying here recently, again, the last few weeks up until yesterday, it went from most likely in that class to reclassified for 25. And I said, that's actually different than yesterday's reporting, which was, it seems likely that he probably will reclass now. That's a different talking point than most likely out of a group of players that are considering it to now it seems like he's just going to do it. And this is coming from a guy that one of the best out there in terms of evaluating and talking, being in the know with not only the players that are international players, and even though technically Muurinen's been, stateside, going to independent school here, playing on the circuit, that kind of thing, he's still, from Finland. 6'10", 6'11", I'm talking about him all the time. Combo forward. I see him as probably a 3-4 at the pro level. At the college level, he's a stretch 4. If he's there, if he gets strong enough, and if there's a way to, maybe he can defend 5s. I was talking about positionally, what can you defend? But here's what else Jovic had to say. I thought this was interesting. So the first part of what we talked about was it's been the plan for a while. Then he says, and if he does reclass, it's got to be for a school that can get him to the NBA and will let him showcase like his handling skills and some of the other stuff that he does, like a Lauri Markkanen, who was at Arizona. And I've made that comparison early on. I'm like, and it's easy to make. They're both 7-footish, and that with skill, shooting skill beyond the 3-point line, can put it on the deck, get to the basket. It's an easy comparison to make. I'm not going to act like I invented that comparison, but I've talked about it for a while, and they're both from Finland. But that's who Jovic brought up. And I think what's interesting here is a school that can get him to the NBA. I don't know. Calipari, the track record, maybe? That seems like that fits the Arkansas part of it. But I think the other part of it, showcasing his skills, part of what he does, and we've mentioned the Lauri Markkanen comparison before. Jovic brought it up in this conversation. But I think what's interesting is you look at around the SEC, you look at a guy like Grant Nelson, 6'10", 6'11", putting the ball on the deck, working his way in for a basket. You look at Arkansas's addition of Malik Ewan out of the portal, big man, because you had to get big men out of the portal who can operate with the basketball. No, he's not a floor spacer as a shooter, but he's a floor spacer as a passer and a guy that can handle away from the basket. Why couldn't Miikka come in and help fill in that 4-spot void with nobody really, that fits that mold comfortably outside of Trevor Brazile? And we know Brazil's not going to play every minute of every game, and we know the history there. So it makes sense that if you're going to add another one, it's going to be that positionally, someone who can stretch the floor and knock down threes. He was a high percentage 3-point shooter on the circuit. Very efficient guy. And has the potential. I mean, I watched this guy so many times, just effortless, comfortable shooting from three. He is a shot blocker. He is a lob threat to dunk because he's athletic, long, tall, and he's a good rebounder. I've mentioned that. I think he's a good rebounder. I wouldn't say that he's an enforcer or a great rebounder, but at the same time, he's someone that checks a lot of boxes for you because we've talked about what Arkansas needs: depth on the front line, overall depth, and perimeter shooting. He can do all of that. He can handle a little bit. You brought in a Malik Ewing to do some of that. Who's to say that you couldn't have a backup four or a guy that's competing for those starting minutes even potentially, or a starter kind of role even if he's playing off the bench and figuring some things out. But Miikka Muurinen makes a lot of sense. So this is just one part of the intel today, because all of these things that Jovich said are things that we could assimilate on our own. It's just interesting for someone who's dialed in. I think the big part of that is it's been the plan for a while. And so Arkansas has been kind of stealth. John Calipari, when we talk about the idea of Muurinen reclassifying, I keep bringing up Will Riley last year, who went to Illinois, and Calipari trying to get on that late. Calipari's history of being down for that kind of thing. All of this stuff makes sense. There's no one smoking gun that says this kid's Arkansas bound, but he's been on campus. It was his favorite visit. He wants somebody that can get him to the NBA. John Calipari, check. Calipari's down for the reclass stuff. And we know since he's been at Arkansas, he tried it with Will Riley. Just so many things here. And the fact that I know that the Arkansas staff's still recruiting him, which includes if he's a reclass. All right. So you got all that. Now, here's the bigger piece of intel, or maybe as good as any we've had lately. I told you guys back, remember when the retention video came out? Remember that? And we still had these guys in the portal that we thought Arkansas was going to ramp up on. We knew they'd been connected with. And it was on a Thursday. I believe it was the Thursday that the retention video came out. And then the weekend was Easter weekend that followed. And it was real quiet. And then on that Monday, I think it was the following Monday when the Chad Baker-Mazara stuff and Jeff Goodman came out, and the staff bristled at that, very adamant. No, look, if we add anybody else, it's got to be someone who's special, someone that makes sense. Well, we just went through all the things that make sense about this situation, just went through all of it. But if you remember, we talked about that. I came on here and did one of these segments. Hey, time to pump the brakes. We got to do it. Staff says so. I asked about specific guys outside of Chad Baker-Mazara. Remember this? Jameer Watkins, PJ Haggerty, the other two names we thought connected. And I got buzzer sounds. I'm like, buzzer, does that mean game over, not interested? And that was confirmed. Right, we're not moving in those directions. Okay. And it went back to the talking point. Someone special, got to make sense. And we've seen this idea that Arkansas's retention mattered the most, and that's where most of the money went. That was correct. You got finality on Adu Thero, finally, and Carter Knox before that. I don't really think of Boogie Fland as someone that you were waiting around on, because there was always a succession for him. Things changed that it wasn't NBA and it became a transfer out. That was not part of figuring out how to finish a roster. Knox and even Thero, as much as they thought it was unlikely, you still wanted to wait that out. So here we are in more smoke and building from Muurinen in a reclass. But right after I did that pod on that Monday, I think it was a Monday, to pump the brakes on everything, right after we came on and talked about all that, it was either the next day or the day after. I go back and find this. But I had gotten a source, and I'm going to remind you what that source told me. The source told me that someone who helped deliver a player to the current Arkansas team, to this current Arkansas staff, in a conversation with one of the staff members said, and it was it wasn't like Arkansas intended to add one more. I hope you remember that. I think I've brought it up once or twice. Pumping since then, we just haven't revisited that line. Haven't revisited that bit of information. Remember, it came out a day or two after the adamant protestations about, yeah, we're looking at any other thing. This was a conversation with someone who delivered a player to the current Arkansas roster for this current Arkansas staff. So that really narrows it down, doesn't it? Not really, but there's not any other way to take it other than it was a very recent conversation, and it was a serious one with someone that helps them, and that they plan to add one more. So could that calculation have changed since Easter weekend? Of course it could have. But the reason I go back to it now, I don't necessarily think that it has, because I have another source now who's telling me, who gave me less than a handful of names that they believe Arkansas is still on some level involved with as a potential just to add to this current roster. Less than a handful. I was given a couple of those names, and this is the part you're not going to like. I can't share those because I was told you cannot put this out. This will blow my cover. This will get me in trouble. But I've got this from somebody. And because I know the staff is still recruiting Miikka Muurinen, because they told me that, I'm comfortable saying that that's one of them. That's one of them. And so, look, we'll see where this goes. It's got to make sense. At the end of the day, you're looking at, can you get on the same page with NIL money? That's going to be in have some connectivity to the role and what you're promising. Are you going to pay up for a guy and say, look, not only are we giving you good NIL money, but we're going to let you show off your handling skills like Lori Marketing. We're going to feature you. I don't know if you're looking for depth necessarily that all the stars would align. I went through everything why it could align, but I haven't given you I don't have a smoking gun that it's destined to be Arkansas. I don't have that, but it very well could end up being that. So I find, again, this very interesting with Miikka Muurinen. It seems now more than ever, everyone you talk to, that it looks like he's going to reclass. Some of the teams he's looking at, look what Michigan did loading up on frontline players, and they just got Yaxel Lindeborg back. I think Utah didn't they have a coaching? I don't know. Some of the teams, that was back in the fall and things changed. We just mentioned that. A Texas Tech visit was supposed to happen. I mentioned yesterday I saw no social media like he did for the other visits with photos and things. It makes me think maybe that didn't happen or likely didn't happen. I don't know that for a fact. That was a few weeks ago. We talked about those other visits back in the fall. But this latest source telling me less than a handful of players. It's I guess where my mind goes with that is I don't see them adding any more than one if they do that. So that's part of that. And this source doesn't know that part. This source doesn't know if they're only going to do, they just have some names. They've put this together through conversations with coaches and people connected with some of these people. But I go back to the source again that said Arkansas was going to add one more, and that here we are, and they're still at least kicking tires on guys. And Miikka Muurinen's one of those. And so, again, to hear it from somebody not on the staff, not that I don't trust them and what they've told me, everything they told me is falling into place. It's just that to hear it from someone else, and they know some of these moving parts, and it's beyond just him and some other names, it just tells me that they're still looking at things. Does it get to the point where they add somebody? It's got to make sense. It might, maybe, whatever the word special, however you want to qualify that, as special mean a higher level guy that's a 5-star. Muurinen to me could be a win in more than just having depth this year. Maybe you try to have a 2-year plan for him to get him to the NBA. He's fast tracking anyway. If he stayed in 26, it's 2 drafts away. So even if you reclass, you could still say, okay, I get the college experience. I get to ramp up with a guy that gets guys in the NBA and helps them get ready. And maybe I'm on a 2-year plan. And I can help and play in year 1, get real minutes, be in a rotation. And then later on, year 2, I slide into that primary 4 spot when Trevor Brazil's gone. I'm trying to paint the picture of why this might work. All right, 20 minutes in, I spent a lot of time on this because I wanted to walk through everything again. But I think it's significant because it could very well be that Arkansas settles with, and they're, when I use the word settle, I don't mean that in a negative connotation, but they're resolved with what they have. They've mentioned before, less is more. And we walked through how, if you want to say, yeah, they went from a 9 deep to an 8 deep with their top rotation pieces, but they added more quality at 9 and 10, and maybe that's more playable in a need where you had attrition last year, and so your thought process is, well, they're kind of splitting the baby here. They're drilling down on top rotation by a player, which seems weird, but they've added 2 that maybe can help. That gets them to 10 deep instead of a 9 deep if you had emergency. So maybe they're showing you some compromise that they needed, that they address some concerns. Again, the 3-point shooting, I don't see where that was addressed. But either way, to me, it has always made sense. I said, if it's my deal, I'm adding one more, even if it's a depth piece. Muurinen helps you in so many ways. You could call it a splash addition. It's a top 10 rated 5-star, and it's he'd be the first frontline guy out of the high school ranks too for Calipari at Arkansas. And again, you might have a 2-year plan there. So I mean, to me, this is, and you've got your team on campus right now. Everyone's there. Carter Knox will be joining soon. I wanted to spend some time going through the roster at the end of this, but because the base, I will see, but there's only about 15 minutes, and I've got intel for you on the schedule. Again, we bring you intel you cannot get anywhere else. Last year, we broke Arkansas going to play Little Rock and Maryland Eastern Shore in one of those multi-team event deals that included the Illinois game, which we already knew about the Illinois game, but we broke the news on Little Rock and Maryland Eastern Shore. I brought you the news that Arkansas was going to host Troy again. You got all that non-con info here. Now, I know others picked up and ran with it like they knew it too. They didn't have that info. They got it right here. They can't bring themselves to saying it, but we got more for you today. A couple of things. And when you look at the non-conference schedule, one is, let's start with this. The contract, and I said this before, so there's always a caveat. The contracts were not signed when I brought you the other information. They were in process. And remember, I kept saying, this is where it's leading to. I don't foresee anything disrupting this, but you never know until the ink is dry on the contracts. Something could change. And as more time went on, it's less and less likely that something changes. So I'm going to give you that caveat on this. Contract not signed yet. But I had one source telling me this, and now I've got it confirmed with a second one. Arkansas is planning to once again play in-state UCA. This is a trend. When Arkansas started playing in-state schools again, it's been mostly in Fayetteville, right? And it's been Little Rock and UCA only. And so Little Rock in an exhibition game the first time, and they've played them a couple of times in the regular season, including last year in Fayetteville. So all those games in Fayetteville. UCA, I think they played more, 3 or 4 times, the Razorbacks, and that included last year as well. But that game moved from Fayetteville to North Little Rock. So Arkansas, the plan is now that Arkansas will host UCA back in Fayetteville, and this will be an early season game, as it is planned right now, November 11th. November 11th. So we know that's going to be early in your non-conference season, and it's in Fayetteville. And why this matters to me is Arkansas typically plays a mid-major in Central Arkansas, in North Little Rock, like they did UCA last year, but typically it's not the in-state school. I just went through that. They just recently, last 5 years, started playing in-states again. It's always been Little Rock and UCA. It's always been in Fayetteville until last year when it was in North Little Rock. But typically it's some other mid-major school in the Little Rock area. And this raises the question because we know Arkansas is going to play Duke in Chicago on Thanksgiving Day. Man, what a brilliant matchup that's going to be. That's mega. That's huge. That's Calipari, the Calipari touch. And, the talk is, and Calipari brought this up again when he was in Little Rock for that event, speaking to fans here, and I covered that. And we asked him all the tough questions about the roster and all that before the event. But during the event, he's talking about getting Baylor here. Well, we know Arkansas played Baylor in Dallas last year. I was at that game, covered it for Hogville. So Baylor here. What does that mean? Well, he's in Little Rock speaking, getting Baylor here. Is he referring to just getting him in Arkansas, in the state, for a home game in Fayetteville? Does it mean here, literally, like in Little Rock? And that's the Little Rock game. And usually, again, Arkansas's played. I think they played Baylor in Little Rock many moons ago. They played Oklahoma State and Illinois. Speaking of Illinois, in North Little Rock. The arena's gone through multiple different names. It's Simmons Bank Arena now. I think before that it was Verizon. Before that it was Alltel, and I think that was the original name. But it's Simmons Bank Arena. But they've played big name teams, high major schools in the past. It's been mostly, again, mid majors over the years. When you started looking at the Mike Anderson / then on to Eric Patrick Musselman EPM, and then Calipari in his first year, and it's in-state UCA. So I wonder about that Baylor game. Could that be where that game's going to be played? I'm not saying it's not Fayetteville. I just bring it up. And is that something that's finalized? Is that finalized? I mean, the Arkansas Duke game's been publicly, I mean, that's out there. So that doesn't have any jeopardy of not happening. I'm assuming Baylor's probably done, but there's nothing official or public out there. But when Calipari referenced some things last year, kind of loosey-goosey, Kansas and playing some of the things he talked about before they actually became public ended up happening like he said it would. So, looks like, to me, it seems like Baylor's probably in the mix. Now we know Arkansas is going to host the ACC SEC Challenge. We know that this year, we expect that. Those things typically alternate, and it's Arkansas's turn to host a home game, by goodness. And I've prayed for North Carolina or Louisville. I admit, last time we talked about this, I said NC State. I mean, Will Wade's over there. I had a ton of source information that was crazy when Arkansas was going through the hiring thing, and it was, Chris Beard and the Calipari, and there was a lot more smoke and a lot more that was going on with the Will Wade thing, with Greg Sankey weighing in and putting his foot down about the SEC bringing him back after the shenanigans at LSU. But the guy's a hell of a coach, has a huge amount of respect in the college coaching circles, and people that are associated with basketball. He's a really good recruiter. But that Arkansas stuff was really interesting, and maybe someday we'll talk more about that. But I would like to see maybe an NC State in the mix for Arkansas hosting a game like that. So there's a lot to look forward to. If you get Baylor and Fayetteville, man, I mean, that on top of getting an ACC team in there, and you hope it's one of those upper echelon kind of teams that I just went through, the ones I'd like to see. I mean, I'd leave out, Clemson wouldn't be horrible relative to the strength of that program recently. You'd hope on your home court for it to be a quad one, it needs to be a team ranked in the top 30 in net. So that's also something you're keeping an eye on. But anyway, so those are some of the scheduling stuff when we talk non-conference. We're waiting on all the conference matchups. Usually the SEC puts out USC at Arkansas. That would be cool. Thank you for the comment, Michael Kopeski. We talked about that last year. Could Arkansas bring a big name in, and you'd hope that it was Southern Cal and that kind of thing. That would be all. EPM would never agree to that. Well, they didn't say EPM. I did. That's my phraseology for the guy. By the way, EPM sent me a really cool Christmas video over the holidays. I never talked about that. It was really kind of cool. I liked it. It was personalized too. It wasn't something generic. It was really nice. We had a real nice exchange there. I had a really good phone conversation on Saturday. Now that we're talking schedule, I had a really good phone conversation. I got a call out of the blue from one of the former Arkansas assistants. Now, I've talked to a lot of assistant coaches in college basketball, head coaches as well. Talked to a couple of head coaches in the last 2 days. But on Saturday, I got a call from a former Arkansas assistant who's now Division I head coach. And there's more than one, so I'm not going to give it away. You can guess. There's more than one of those. But he told me that he's also efforting to get on Arkansas' schedule this year. So there's another scheduling nugget for you. That's intel. Even though I'm not telling you who it is, you might be able to figure that out. Now remember, Chris Crutchfield, he's the head coach at Omaha. So you got more than one that are out there. So I want to remind everybody of that. Another piece of intel for you on the scheduling, Little Rock, it doesn't look like we'll be back on the schedule this year. Now, that could change, potentially, I guess. That could potentially change. But I've repeatedly been told that to this point, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Again, I don't close the door on that. I don't know that they've got all their ducks in a row at Arkansas, especially when teams are still trying to effort to get on there. But at the same time, people I talk to feel like that's probably not going to happen this year. Now, you remember once Arkansas started playing UCA in Little Rock, I think they played UCA at least once more than Little Rock. And there was a season there under EPM where they didn't play either school after they had started playing them. So you just never know. But it looks like, again, just to circle back to what we started talking about in scheduling, the intel is, looks like Arkansas, the contract's not signed. Remember the disclaimers. Something, I guess, could blow up and it changes. But as of now, both schools are on the same page for UCA to be back playing Arkansas in Fayetteville this coming season. And the date intended for that as of now is November 11th. All right, guys, you got a lot of good stuff today. And we're going to do roster. I'll have more content this weekend, probably tomorrow. If something breaks or shakes, we're coming back on. But yeah, this is really good stuff. And we're going to go through the roster was updated. And you see what I think is some reliable information in terms of their jersey numbers. I mean, I don't think they're going to change it again. I guess they could change these again. So they've established those, and they've got heights and weights. Now, some of that, I think once they really get in there and go through some stuff, will probably change. It usually does. We know they're about to go really ramp up with the limited on-court stuff, the strength and conditioning, all that. They're getting into summer session one, all this stuff we've talked about. Carter Knox, they're still waiting to arrive, I guess. He was in a different process and just recently made an announcement. He'd been in New York for a while. But we're going to go through more on that. Let's see, we're 32 minutes in. The game doesn't start. Okay, I'll tell you what, I'm all over the map here. We got a few more minutes before the Diamond Hogs. I just don't want to interfere with that. I'm just going to quickly go through some stuff. Jaden Karoletwa, one of the back-end guys, returning, wearing number 0. We went through the 12 names yesterday during yesterday's segment of players before this stuff got released. So I went through all 12 talking about the roster and what it meant for Theo to stay in. And I mentioned all 12 of these names. So it was good timing because later we got the jersey numbers and some of the measurables again. But Jaden Karoletwa, was he 0 last year? Well, he'll wear 0 this year if he wasn't. 6'5", 180 pounds. That's what they've got him listed on the official roster. Malik Thomas, the 5-star guard out of Pittsburgh, going to wear numero uno, number 1. 6'4", 180 is his listing. So he's a guy I think I'm interested in to see the strength and conditioning for him even through the summer. Is this a guy that can get closer to a 185 by the time the season starts, get a little more sturdy for the rigors of the SEC and some of these non-con matchups that you're going to have? And then what does he do? Again, I've mentioned him as coming off the bench. I project him with a 20 minutes per game kind of thing initially. And maybe one of the guys, if not the guy, that ends up being the one you're turning to for your three-point gun, for your marksmanship. And then that's, how does a freshman translate? How erratic are they with shot selection and chasing? Carter Knox went through all that, and he's not the volume kind of shooter coming in that Malik Thomas was. So that's tricky. Number 2 is the newest hog that as far as we know, Amir Brown, listed at 5, the point guard we talked a lot about, went through the stuff he told me about this being a national contender. That was on the show 2 days ago after we learned of his presence and the fact that he was on the roster, a walk-on. 5'10" guard listed at 160. Number 5, Darius Acup Jr. We know he's rocked with number 5. I mean, he's branding that as his number, so that's not a surprise at all. But he looks good. 6'2", 180. That's what they got for him right now, Darius Acup Jr. Trevor Brazile has been number 2 at Arkansas. He's been number 4. I think that was last year. Was he 4 last year? And he's changing to number 7, still listed at 6'10", 230. I think that's the same. That's just a carryover from last year. He's the locks are cut, the braids are gone. He's got the short cropped haircut, and he's a guy that came on like wildfire. And if you don't add anybody else to this roster, he's your 4. I mean, he's really the one guy that's what he is. He can help at the 5, but he's your lone and only there. And I think a guy like Carter Knox, who's next, number 11, going to wear number 11, still listed at 6'6", 220. At the combine, we know that he measured just over 6'5", 6'5 and a quarter or something like that. Barefoot, though. So in shoes, that makes sense. I think his weight at the combine was between 214, 215 pounds, somewhere in there. So 220. I guess if you're got shoes on, and you're getting closer to that 220 if the shoes probably don't weigh 5 pounds. Malik Ewan wearing number 12 as he did at Florida State, 6'11", 230. Those are the same measurables they had for him there. So again, I think some of these might change sooner rather than later when they get through some of the stuff they're going to be doing here in the limited stuff over the next several weeks. DJ Wagner back in wearing number 21, as we affectionately, playfully know him as, number 21, 6'4", 195 listed as. Nick Pringle wearing the 23 that he wore at Alabama, 6'10", 225. Again, those look like the same measurables that he had at South Carolina, that they listed for him at South Carolina. Billy Richmond, the third back end, number 24, 6'5", 205. Isaiah Seeley, 30. That's been his number at times. 6'7", 200. So we knew he was 6'7". He is now officially Arkansas's tallest perimeter player. When you think about him, probably initially as a wing, but also the versatility that he showed on the high school level to play 1, 2, or 3. But Isaiah Seeley listed at 6'7", 200. I was a little surprised by the 200. I thought he'd would weigh a little less than that in terms of what was published initially. So that's encouraging if that's true. Kareem Artal, number 35, 6'8", 210. So he's always been portrayed as 6'9", and then remember we went through this. The basketball media part of it, social media part, put out a graphic when they brought him in, and they mistakenly listed him at 6'7". We talked about it on one of these pods, and then later, quickly, they got it corrected to 6'9", which matched up with what we'd always heard. But now, on the actual official roster, they're listing him 6'8", 210. So, it makes me wonder for some of these guys, are they saying this is accurate for everybody? Because this is a little different than what was out there. And so they've made some adjustments here for this initial release of the roster with jersey numbers, designations, and then their heights and weights. Of course, it tells us also where they're from. I didn't go through all that. All right, it's 2 o'clock. It's Diamond Hog time. We've spent nearly 38 minutes in here. Calipari tweeted out a photo with him and the team, all these names we mentioned except for Carter Knox. And Calipari's smart enough to make sure fans don't freak out and mention in the tweet, Carter will join us soon, so that people are going, where's Carter Knox? Where's Carter Knox? And it was weird. You had a cluster of most of the players. And so looking at it from the perspective of the viewer, looking at the photo, to the right of that photo, and in their perspective where they're standing looking out at the camera, it's on the left side. But from our viewpoint on the right, there was a bit of a gap from the cluster of players to where Billy Richmond on the end and Isaiah Seeley were standing. And that gap looks like a perfect place for Carter Knox to fill for the next photo. I didn't know if that was intentional. Just they rushed to get this done, and guys on the end on that one end didn't get a little closer. It looked a little funny. But no Carter Knox there. They could have superimposed him in there, and you would have never known the difference because it would have fit in there perfectly. All right, I really am trailing off. I hope you liked the intel today. I think this is, again, we bring it for those that laugh at that kind of stuff. Always remember, the finality in things is there's a million things that lead up to it, and the more you know about that, the more you can stay informed. It doesn't mean that the process of what's going on ends in the result of what could happen, which is what we're talking about during process. Just always remember that. But we're always glad to bring it, share as much as we can. I hope everybody got something out of this. Enjoy the Diamond Hogs in this first game victory. I don't want to jinx it, but I got those feels today, and I'm going to tune in myself here in a few minutes. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. Please hit subscribe, like, and share. That helps us out. Until next time, we appreciate you being here. Thank you. Take care of yourselves. Be good. See you soon.